This film is a Clear Company production, kindly supported by Microlink PC, Green Park, Southeastern and DWF LLP. 11 million people in the UK declare a disability.
There are 11 million disabled people, and we all know that there is a shrinking pool of talent out there, and if we exclude all of these people from work, then we really are making life very, very difficult for ourselves.
1 in 5 candidates is disabled.
People who are disabled bring with them all sorts of qualities, life experiences, background, perspectives you probably wouldn't have in an organisation if you weren't a diverse organisation.
Disabled people's annual disposable spending, circa £100 billion.
I think people now recognise that in terms of their employer brand and in terms of creating leaders that can manage through complexity, to have a diversity of thought within your business is a competitive advantage.
Over 74% of disabled candidates say they will not declare their disability at recruitment stage for fear of discrimination.
Lack of confidence and fear are the key barriers in this area.
36% said the reason for that fear was based on previous experience of discrimination.
The biggest flaw is the assumption people make around disability, whether it's a sensory impairment or a physical impairment.
71% of disabled candidates said negative assumptions about their ability was the biggest barrier they faced in recruitment.
I think a lot of us will say as employers, oh yes, we really support diversity, we're really keen to have more disabled staff, this is very important for us, without thinking about, and therefore what do we need to do different to make that actually happen.
The journey starts here. Clear expertise. Getting started. One of the common mistakes right at the beginning of the process is not involving the right people.
It's really important that recruiters involve their key stakeholders right from the beginning, because one of the things I've learned is how important it is to make sure that the job profile and the job spec up front are really accurate and really clear, and that we understand exactly what it is that we're looking for every role.
There is a general lack of confidence as well as competence, and I think people are often afraid of doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, and therefore it probably is easier to leave things as they are.
If you don't involve people who may themselves not be comfortable or confident around disability from the beginning, then you're really only storing up the problem until further down the journey, because otherwise they will just revert at the end and be recruiting against a different brief than the one you've set out.
The danger of not getting the process right at that stage is that you could end up with claims from, for example, disabled candidates that they've been excluded from the process and have been discriminated against. So in the worst case, you might have legal claims.
It makes a lot of sense to have a fresh look at things with a fresh pair of eyes and some fresh expert advice on some of these issues to make sure that ultimately you're going to get the best person for the job.
The brief itself is key to the process, and just recycling an old brief is not only lazy, it can also set up barriers against inclusive recruitment.
That might be a barrier before you've even started. If you don't question that from the beginning, you've got 2 risks. 1, a barrier that you're not recruiting disabled talent. 2, you've got criteria within your brief that you cannot defend if you're asked to do so because it's no longer relevant. And actually the third one is you could waste a lot of time and money on a recruitment project with a poor brief that you started off with.
If you just go for the previous spec, if you don't think any more broadly than that, then in fact you are going to lose out on this whole thing about how do you become a really truly inclusive employer. You could potentially find yourself in legal difficulties because you could be discriminating and be seen to be discriminating against certain groups.
The danger to watch out for with the job description is that if it's been in place for some time and hasn't been reviewed, it may well not marry up to reality. There needs to be some careful thought as to what really is required for that role. Again, it's very easy to include criteria that actually aren't relevant to the role.
Knowledge of the law is really important throughout the recruitment process. Even these initial stages can trip you up if you're not careful.
The assumption that a disabled person can't fulfil a sales role, that's the biggest flaw, is the assumption people make around disability, whether it's a sensory impairment or a physical impairment, the assumption is the problem.
Whenever you're recruiting for a job, like a sales job, if you make generalised assumptions that a disabled person can't do the job, well, that's going to get you into legal hot water.
There's a line, and that line is evidence. So if we can provide evidence of our assertions, then we can provide evidence of candidates who we feel are able to add value, that's great. But where the danger is on the other side of that line, which is where our preconceptions are not based on outcomes, but they're based on what we think will be easier to do.
Really what the recruiter needs to do is stick to what they're looking for. Make sure they've articulated the brief correctly, that they've analysed the role, and that they go out to market with that, and let the candidates themselves decide whether or not they feel they've got the competency and the experience to apply for that role.
So, it's all about getting the basics in place. Involve your stakeholders from the start. Don't cut corners when it comes to writing your brief. Be aware of the law and never make assumptions.